An electronic patient record, and it goes by many names such as an EMR, which is electronic medical record, EHR, electronic health record, EPR, electronic patient record, but it all really means the same thing. Whenever you go into your doctor's office, generally you'll see behind the secretary or the receptionist this whole wall of paper charts or manila envelopes, and on them they'll have different numbers and everything, and they look at you and say, yes, we've pulled your chart, and maybe they'll pat the manila envelope that has your name on it. So that contains your entire record of what that particular provider has done for you, what he understands about you, what it has your family history in it, it might have some social history in it, it has reports of any testing that the provider has requested that you take, x-rays, their findings. So it is your life as that physician understands you. So that's what a paper record is. So now we're just moving all of that paper record of your life into an electronic stage. So instead of having a wall of manila envelopes with numbers on it and names, it's now going to be stacks of memory and disks. And it will have the same basic things in it. It's just an electronic file versus a physical hard copy file.
Can you talk a little bit about what the benefits of moving to a system like that are?
Sure. For a community physician, and by community physician I mean your local doctor that you see as often as you need to see that person. So if you're relatively healthy, you see them once a year. If you're a little sicker, you see them more frequently. But it's the person you go in and you say, hey doc, this is what's happening to me. That is the community physician. And how an electronic record can help them is that first, they don't have to do any filing for this information that comes into the office about you. So if you're ordered a blood test or you're ordered an x-ray, that information has to come in, it has to get into the right paper folder, it has to end up in your chart. And that communication has to happen in such a way that it's not mistaken between the other John Does in the office. There could be, maybe he has 5 John Does, and it's got to get into the right John Doe. It helps in filing because those records are generally, they have a specific key so that I know I'm always talking about John A. Doe and not John B. Doe. Second thing for the community physician would be that now you don't have to store all of this paperwork. Even after a patient has left, maybe they've moved out of the community, maybe they've gotten a new physician, whatever the reason, that physician has to keep that paperwork for around 5 years for adults. For children, it's 26 years. So they no longer have to store all of this physical paper somewhere off-site, because nobody has enough storage on wherever their medical building is. So that's a second benefit. And the ease of having a computer on the desk and looking up someone's file and having all of that information at your fingertips is a third very important benefit for the provider, because whenever you come in, they can then bring you up. They can thumb through all the information while you're talking to them, and they can add information to it. I was at a physician's office, and while I was sitting there, he was dictating my medical record to my actual chart. So that did not have to go out to a third party to be typed up and sent back for corrections. He was doing it while he was there, so it makes him more efficient. He could see where he needed to correct it. It was just like a word processor. So he went right in, changed the words that he wanted to, and it was finished by the time I left that room. And I received a copy of that. that was a very positive experience because I knew exactly what was going into my chart. I had a copy of it to take with me at the end of the time. So it was very positive. So those are just some of the positive aspects of having an electronic chart available to a physician.
In this particular health IT scenario, we're talking about the implementation of an EPR system in a community physician's office. Can you talk a little bit about the scope of such a project in this scenario?
Sure. The scope of this particular project was that this particular physician's office wanted everything to be electronic. So, and when I say everything, they wanted it from soup to nuts, from the scheduling of the patient's appointment all the way through dropping a bill and sending it electronically to the insurance company. So you have a scheduling process, you have a check-in, the patient's now here process, you have the ability to pull up the record and view all of the electronic notes, all of the electronic testing that has been sent back, all of the electronic orders. Then on the billing end, you have the ability to drop a bill, send that to that particular person's insurance company, get that bill turned around much faster than in a paper world, and also be able to tell the patient at the time when the physician is ordering, if it's a medication, whether that medication is on their insurance plan or whether they're going to have to pay additional because that's not on their insurance plan. But also for the physician, then he can look at those alternative drugs to say, oh, well, here's one that's on your plan. I'll give you this drug as a generic, and it's much cheaper for you to have a copay with that. Then another aspect of an electronic patient record like this would be that you could send a patient a reminder, hey, your yearly exam time is coming up, call us and make an appointment. Or you might have a patient that's a little sicker, and so whenever their testing comes in, and it can remind the patient, you need to come and talk to me about the lab work we did last week. Please call my office and make an appointment. So you can send out reminder cards about things that either the physician doesn't really have time to always think about, or his attention is divided between all of his patients. So it can remind him, do you really want to have an appointment with this patient again in 2 months? And it can send out a reminder card to that patient to prompt a call to say, I need that appointment.
How would such a project get implemented in this scenario, including a timeline and the ultimate end goal? What are the technical or IT components of this, and how does a potentially small physician's office that may not have an IT staff go about putting a system like this in place?
The timeline for something like this, depending on how customized the physician wants it to be, could be anywhere from 6 months to a year. Now, a physician who doesn't have their own IT staff can contract with outside third parties so that they would host the software on their own servers, so that whenever the patient comes in, the physician calls out to that server, brings up that information. So it's basically hosted in a third party. It could be either across town, it could be the office next door. There are multiple companies that you pay to host the information, and they'll keep it completely backed up, make sure it's there. If there's a disaster, they will give you time frames about how long it would take to bring back up. Now, if you're in a larger community physician's office where maybe you have 4 or 5 or even as many as 10 or 15 physicians, you might have a house staff or an IT staff on premises, and so you could do your own hosting. That decreases the cost in that you don't pay for hosting, but it increases the cost because you have to have the physical space, you need to have the servers, you need to have the network. So in thinking of these things, you need to look at both types and present those options to the provider who's actually doing the work or going to be paying for it to be done. So there's multiple ways of going about getting the IT part of it done without them having a lot of expertise in that area, or even needing a lot of expertise in that area.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of security and actually even legal requirements for security around an electronic patient record?
Sure. There are a lot of regulations that deal with patients' records and how secure they have to be. And the biggest one that most people have heard is HIPAA. It's a government regulation that basically makes security on a person's medical record paramount, because you don't want these records to go out into the public domain. You really want to have a tight security on those. So whenever a provider is looking, whether they're hosting it in-house or hosting it across the city with a company that does this professionally, that's one of the areas that really needs to be looked at closely. What is your security? How can I make sure that my records stay secure from someone else's hospital records? You'll spend a lot of time talking about that until you can make sure that not only you feel comfortable with that, but also making sure that the provider and his staff feels comfortable with that. Because whether a patient is a famous patient, very well known, or whether they're just Joe Schmo off the street, no one wants their medical records out there for all to see.